Okay, so I wanted to discuss my opinion on the federal grand jury because we know from things that were said in court, specifically from Elisa Massoff, that there were federal grand jury subpoenas. And a big piece of the PCA came from one of those subpoenas. And when that first came out, I started thinking, what could have been a federal charge they were looking into? Because we know the murders themselves were not federal charges. And my opinion since then has been that they were looking into federal stalking charges. Now, we know that Bill Thompson said in court there was no stalking, and I believe that is because surveillance does not meet the definition of stalking. So you couldn't charge him with stalking unless the victims knew they were being watched and it put fear, etc. into them. But until they investigated that, they wouldn't know. And stalking someone across state lines is federal. So I believe that's what they were looking into. But let's take a look at the information about federal stalking. This is from the University of Houston Law Center, and it talks about the federal law on stalking. So it says federal stalking and harassment laws. When harassing or stalking behavior involves the internet, mail, or activities that cross state lines, the crime may be charged as a federal offense. Federal law contains criminal provisions that penalize stalking another person when the unlawful behavior involves interstate commerce. Generally speaking, when harassing or stalking behavior involves the internet, mail, or activities that cross state lines, the crime can be charged as a federal offense. It says, let's learn more about the federal crime and its penalties. Is stalking a federal crime? Is cyberstalking a federal crime? Yes. Federal law criminalizes both acts of stalking and cyberstalking. In order to violate the federal, as opposed to a state, anti-stalking law, a person must either travel across state lines, internationally or within U.S. territories, maritime jurisdictions, or tribal lands, or use the mail, internet, or some type of interstate or electronic communication system or service like a phone, texting, messaging, or social media. Because of these requirements, the federal crime is generally referred to as interstate stalking. What is considered stalking or cyberstalking under federal law? A person commits the federal crime of stalking by traveling across state lines internationally or within federal jurisdictions with the intent to injure, intimidate, surveil, or harass another person, and by engaging in conduct that places the person in fear of death or serious bodily injury to oneself, a member of their immediate family, a spouse or intimate partner, or a pet, service animal, or horse, or causes, attempts to cause, or could reasonably be expected to cause substantial emotional distress to any person described above. Now, if you notice, that's a lot like Idaho's law. The person, basically, they have to know that they were being stalked. So they had to feel fear, intimidation, harassment. So let's continue. Federal courts have defined substantial emotional distress as mental distress, suffering, or anguish, including depression, shame, humiliation, shock, embarrassment, grief, anxiety, or fear. Cyberstalking involves the same intent and conduct but occurs through the use of interstate or electronic communications, such as mail, email, phone, internet, or social media. A conviction for cyberstalking also requires that the prosecutor prove the defendant engaged in a course of conduct, meaning 2 or more acts. What are the penalties for stalking and cyberstalking? So a person convicted of stalking under federal law faces up to 5 years in prison and a $250,000 fine. If the defendant's unlawful conduct results in the death or physical injury to a victim, a conviction can land them in prison for 10 years, 20 years, or even up to life. Defendants guilty of stalking in violation of a restraining order receive a minimum prison sentence of 1 year. When the victim of the stalking crime is younger than 18, a guilty defendant is subject to imprisonment for 5 years on top of the underlying sentence. State versus federal charges for stalking or cyberstalking. Every state prohibits stalking conduct similar to that prohibited under the federal law, and in quite a few cases, a defendant's conduct can violate both state and federal laws, especially when it comes to cyberstalking. Whether a case will be prosecuted in state or federal court may depend on agency resources, the circumstances involved in the crime, and the coverage of and penalties found in the state statute, among other factors. If the conduct doesn't fall under the federal law involving interstate travel or communications, only state charges can be brought. Now here is the U.S. Code, and it's 18 U.S. Code 2261A, and it talks about travels in interstate or foreign commerce. But what's interesting here is it says with intent to kill, injure, harass, intimidate, or place under surveillance with intent to kill, injure, harass, or intimidate. So it almost sounds like they could get you on federal stalking even if you didn't know about it. But no, as we read further, you'll see why. It goes on to say, places that person in reasonable fear of the death of or serious bodily injury to that person, an immediately family member, a spouse or intimate partner of that person, or the pet, service animal, emotional support animal, or horse of that person, or causes, attempts, or cause, or would be reasonably expected to cause substantial emotional distress to a person described in the clause 1, 2, 3, or subparagraph A, or with the intent to kill, injure, harass, intimidate, or place under surveillance with intent to kill, injure, harass, or intimidate another person if they use the mail or any interactive computer service or electric communication service, electronic system, or interstate commerce. So that's the cyberstalking part. But again, it places the parameters that it must place the person in reasonable fear of the death of or serious bodily injury to a person, a pet, service animal, emotional support animal, horse, etc. And then causes, attempts to cause, or would be reasonably expected to cause substantial emotional distress to a person described in clause 1, 2, or 3 of paragraph 1A. Shall be punished as provided in section 2261B or section 2261 capital B, as the case may be. So as you can see, the federal law is like Idaho's. The person that was being watched has to know. There has to be distress. There has to be fear. So, and that's scary because somebody could be sitting outside your house, my house, anybody's house right now, watching us from a distance. But if we don't know, then it's not illegal. I mean, I do understand that because it just protects somebody from being arrested for, hey, what are you doing on the street type of thing. You just can't. But at the same time, just because I don't know the person's watching me doesn't mean maybe that person's not doing something wrong by sitting out there every night watching me, you know? So that's scary. And what I say to people is just be vigilant. Have alarm systems, have a Ring doorbell cam. Ladies, protect yourself. But this goes for men too, because home invasions, etc. So make sure you protect yourself, be vigilant. But I believe that's what they were looking at with the federal grand jury. I believe the federal grand jury looked to see if he had stalked them or cyberstalked them. And they could not find any proof that the victims knew that they were being watched. But I do believe deep down, that's been my first impression from the start, was that he was watching that house. It wasn't random and that he just went there that morning. I believe he had been surveying them and they didn't know. They didn't know he was watching them. So when Anne says that there was no connection, I believe that. He never talked to them. He never physically contacted them. He never probably even contacted them through email or anything else, but he was watching the house and watching their comings and goings. And that's scary. But, like I say, not a crime, so federal grand jury would have had to return a verdict of no. You know, this is not a crime. We can't pursue this further. And of course, Idaho can't do anything either because their law also says that the victims would have needed to know about it. So, but that's just my opinion. Let me know what you think.